Get us the owner now. My father's voice tore through the elegant air of the Asheville Country Club. The crystal glasses on the tables trembled, and every head in the room turned toward him. My mother, arms crossed, added coldly, "She doesn't belong here. Remove her immediately." I stood only a few steps away, dressed simply in a white shirt and linen trousers, feeling my heartbeat steady yet silent. The club manager, a man in his 50s, looked at me and smiled faintly. His tone was calm, almost serene. "Ma'am, how would you like to manage your family's membership?" The room fell completely silent. My parents froze, as if they couldn't believe what they'd just heard. Sunlight poured through the glass windows, casting a pale glow on their faces, half confusion, half fear. I didn't have to say a word. In my mind, one thought echoed clearly. That was the first moment in my life I didn't need to speak because the truth spoke for me. What about you? Have you ever stayed silent and still made the world listen? I'd really love to know where you're watching this from. I still remember my father's eyes when I was a child, sharp as a blade, enough to silence me before I could even speak. The Hart family was the kind everyone admired from the outside. My father, Robert Hart, was a well-known real estate developer in North Carolina, always seen in dark gray suits with a tiny gold pin on his tie. My mother, Evelyn, was the definition of an upper-class woman, hair neatly tied, a trace of Chanel perfume, and a soft voice that always carried authority. My sister, Madeline, the shining gem of the family, graduated from Yale, married a high-profile lawyer, drove a white Range Rover, and was featured in local society magazines as the pride of the Hart family. In that perfect picture, I was the misplaced color, the one that didn't fit the frame. Even as a child, I could feel that love in our house was not distributed evenly. I was always told to adjust myself, to speak softly, sit up straight, and wear outfits that matched the family's aesthetic so I wouldn't ruin the overall image. At every event, my mother would glance at me and whisper, "Don't talk too much, Diana. You don't need to draw attention." At first, I thought it was polite advice. Later, I realized it was a way of erasing me. They wanted me to exist quietly, like a decorative shadow in a grand house. On Friday evenings, when the family hosted gatherings in the grand living room, I would usually stand in the kitchen, folding napkins or helping the staff carry trays of wine. Once, a guest asked my father, "Is this your daughter?" My father chuckled lightly and replied, "Oh, just the younger one, still figuring out what to do with her life." The guests laughed, and my face burned as I stared down at the tray in my hands. They spoke about me the way people speak about an unfinished product, a failed project. Madeline, my sister, always knew how to make everything revolve around her. She was sent to piano lessons at 6, ballet at 7, horseback riding at 8, and then to an expensive private school. My mother would often say, "You should learn from your sister, Diana. Madeline has the grace of a true lady." But I love to draw. I could sit for hours by the window sketching trees, faces passing by, or simply the way afternoon light fell across the dining table. Once, I brought one of my drawings to show my father. He glanced at it briefly and said flatly, "Art doesn't feed anyone. You should study economics like normal people." After that, I put my brushes away in a drawer and only painted when no one was watching. I grew up surrounded by comparisons and silent judgments. When Madeline received her acceptance letter from Yale, my father opened a bottle of wine, invited the neighbors, and celebrated like royalty. When I got into an art school in Charlotte, he barely looked at the letter and muttered, "They'll take anyone who can pay tuition." I forced a smile, pretending not to care. But that night, I cried until I couldn't breathe. I remember wondering what it would take for him to look at me differently, not with disappointment, but with a hint of pride. My mother loved perfection more than anything. She never left the house without fixing her hair or checking her lipstick in the mirror. She taught me how to smile just enough, how to speak charmingly but never too much. But she never taught me how to love myself. She only cared about how I looked when it reflected well on her. Once, I showed up to a family dinner in a dress I had made myself, not expensive, but I was proud of it because it was my first original design. The moment I walked in, she pulled me aside and whispered furiously, "Are you trying to embarrass me? Who wears something like this to a club dinner?" I stood still as she turned away, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air thick and heavy, like an invisible wall between generations, between real beauty and the kind that needed approval. I lost count of how many times I was left out of family photos. At every holiday, the photographer would arrange everyone in place. My father would always adjust the lineup, saying, "Let Madeline stand in the center, Diana. Just a bit to the right, behind the tree's shadow." Later, those pictures would appear in local magazines under the headline, "The Hart Family, a Symbol of Success and Elegance." I never once saw my face in them. When I turned 18, my father threw me a birthday party, or rather, a party for himself, since every guest there was one of his business associates. I didn't expect much, just hoped that someone might remember it was my day. As the night drew to a close, he raised his glass and said, "Let's toast to Diana, and hope that one day she'll achieve something that makes this family proud." Scattered laughter rippled around the table. I tried to smile, but something inside me tightened, like invisible hands squeezing my chest. That night, I went upstairs, took off the high heels my mother had insisted I wear, and sat by the window. Outside, the pool lights shimmered faintly through the white curtains. I wondered, is it my fault that I never learned how to become what they wanted? From that day on, I began to understand. In this house, love came with conditions. They loved you only if you reflected the image they wanted to see. And if you didn't, they would erase you quietly, not with shouting, but with cold silence. I grew up with that silence. It seeped into my habits, the way I walked softly, the way I apologized even when I hadn't done anything wrong, the way I smiled to hide the hurt. I became an expert at making myself as small as possible, just to exist in their world. As I write this now, I can still hear my father's voice from that night echoing in my head, "You'll never accomplish anything that makes us proud." That sentence carved itself into my heart like an engraving, a curse I carried throughout my youth. I don't know when I started believing it that I truly was a failure. But from that wound, something else began to grow, the quiet hunger to prove them wrong. Not for revenge, but so I could one day look in the mirror and say, I stood up on my own, even when no one stood with me. The day I received the rejection letter from the Charlotte Art Institute, I sat for a long time on the stone steps outside the dorm. Fallen leaves gathered around my feet, autumn wind brushing cold against my skin, and in my hands was a thin piece of paper that felt as heavy as lead. "We regret to inform you." Just a few words, but I read them over and over until they burned into my mind. I knew then there would be no second chance. My parents had made it clear from the start. If you don't get a scholarship, we won't pay another cent for that meaningless major. And they meant it. 2 days later, my mother called, her voice cool and precise. "We can't keep wasting money on something that leads nowhere. Come home, Diana." I hung up the phone and felt as if I'd just been pushed off the edge of the world. I didn't go back home. Instead, I packed a few clothes, wrapped my paintbrushes in a cloth bag, and moved in with a classmate who shared a small apartment downtown. I started looking for work, anything that could help me survive. It was the first time in my life I walked into a cafe not as a customer, but as someone asking for a job. The manager glanced at my application and asked, "No experience?" I nodded. He sighed. "All right then, cleaning tables, washing cups. Start tomorrow." In those early days, my hands blistered from dish soap, and my back ached from standing 8 hours straight. I learned how to smile at customers even when they spoke down to me. Once, a woman in a tailored suit looked at me and whispered to her friend, "Whose daughter ends up doing work like this?" I bit my lip and lowered my head to wipe the table. I didn't know it yet, but those lowly jobs would one day teach me more than any classroom ever did. That Christmas, I called home. I wasn't expecting much, just wanted to hear my mother's voice, even for a few polite sentences. When she answered, her tone was cold, like the frost gathering on the porch. "Are you planning to come home?" she asked. I said softly, "I thought, maybe I'd take the night bus." There was a pause. Then she said slowly, "We don't need a reminder that our family has a failure." My breath caught. A moment later, all I could hear was the dull, endless beeping of a disconnected call. I stood outside the cafe porch, snowflakes melting into my hair, the smell of coffee mixing with car exhaust. Around me, the city glowed with holiday lights, yet I felt like a shadow out of place, unnecessary. I decided to leave Charlotte right after New Year's. A new city, a new beginning. Denver. I had nothing but a few sets of clothes and $600 in my pocket, just enough to rent a room half the size of my old bathroom. I found a job as a receptionist at a small hotel called Silver Pines Inn, an aging building tucked quietly between snow-covered hills. The owner was a kind old man named Walter Brooks, in his 60s, who still brewed coffee for guests every morning. I remember him smiling and saying, "No one here knows who you are, Diana, so if you want to become someone new, this is your chance." In those first weeks at Silver Pines Inn, I did everything: cleaned rooms, worked the front desk, even helped in the kitchen. I learned how to talk to travelers from all over the world. Young couples, business guests, and even those who complained about the smallest stain on a towel. But I didn't mind. For the first time, I felt free. No one compared me to Madeline. No one asked what school I went to. I was simply Diana, the brown-haired receptionist who greeted every guest with a genuine smile. Then one day, everything changed. That March, Silver Pines Inn received a notice from the bank they were about to lose the property to foreclosure. Walter tried to keep it from me, but I overheard his phone call in the office. I saw him slump into his chair, hands trembling, the letter slipping from his fingers to the floor. "I can't lose this place, Diana," he whispered. "This inn is my whole life." I sat quietly for a moment, then said softly, "Will you let me try something?" For the next 3 days, I barely slept. I worked on a marketing plan, collecting, booking data, analyzing guest reviews, and designing a full campaign for the inn's first ever online promotion. I photographed the most beautiful corners of Silver Pines Inn, built a simple website, and ran ads targeting travelers looking for a warm home in the snow. I even proposed a new package called the Winter Retreat, including hot chocolate workshops, knitting classes, and short mountain hikes. Walter looked at me, a mix of worry and hope in his eyes. "Do you really think this could work?" I smiled. "I believe it will." 2 weeks later, a small miracle happened. Bookings tripled. Local travel blogs started featuring stories about the fairy tale inn in Denver's mountains. Walter stared at the revenue chart, speechless. Then he turned to me, voice trembling. "You just saved Silver Pines Inn." It was the first time in my life I'd ever heard the word save connected to my name. Not saving face, not saving family reputation, saving something that truly mattered. From that moment, Walter trusted me completely. He put me in charge of marketing and staff training. I worked harder than ever, not to prove anything to my parents, but because, for the first time, I actually felt capable. One afternoon, as I was rearranging the front desk, Walter walked over with a cup of tea and said, "You know, Diana, some people are born to continue what others started. But some are born to start something entirely new. You're the second kind." I didn't realize how much I had changed until that moment. His gaze reminded me of my father's, but this time, it wasn't filled with contempt. It was filled with faith. A few months later, Walter called me into his office. He set a folder on the table. "I want you to look at this," he said. Inside was a proposal for a small consulting company to help boutique hotels restructure their business models. "I'm getting old," he chuckled, "and I need someone to carry this forward. If you agree, we'll build it together. Harborstone Hospitality Group. How does that sound?" I looked at him, feeling a door open inside my chest. I didn't know if it was destiny, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never go back to being someone else's shadow again. That night, I went back to my room and opened the paintbrushes I had hidden away for years. I painted Silver Pines Inn under the glow of falling snow, and at the bottom of the canvas, I signed my name without trembling, without hesitation. Diana Hart. No longer the name whispered at family dinners, but a name that was beginning to mean something on its own. As the night wind swept through the window, I whispered to myself, "This path may not have anyone's approval, but at least it's mine." And in that moment, I knew the wound from all those years of being dismissed was finally beginning to heal, not because of anyone else, but because of my own hands. Harborstone Hospitality Group was born in a small room on the third floor of Silver Pines Inn with 2 old desks, 1 battered laptop, and more dreams than I dared to say aloud. Walter sat across from me as I signed the registration papers. He smiled and said, "That's it, we're official. Let's begin, partner." I remember laughing, tears welling up at the same time. From a girl who had once been thrown out of her home for studying art, I now had a company of my own, small, but truly mine. No one could take it away. Walter handled finance and investor relations, while I managed analysis, negotiations, and operational redesign for struggling hotels on the verge of collapse. In the early months, our company had just 3 people: Walter, me, and a college intern running our social media page. Our first project was an old hotel in Savannah, Georgia. The place was falling apart, peeling walls, demoralized staff, empty rooms. I arrived in a cheap gray suit, carrying a suitcase full of reports and drafts. The owner, an older woman, looked at me skeptically and said, "I've had consultants before, dear. They all failed. What makes you any different?" I smiled softly and replied, "I don't think. I'll show you." 3 months later, the hotel's revenue had doubled. Tourists started checking in again, and the name Harborstone appeared for the first time in a regional business magazine. Walter called it our first miracle. I called it my second chance at life. After Savannah, we took on projects in Nashville, Charleston, and New Orleans. Each city came with its own story, its own challenge. I learned how to negotiate with investors, worked 16-hour days, and often slept in half-renovated hotel rooms. I grew used to the smell of fresh paint, the drilling sounds, the late-night cleaning crews. People began calling me the fixer, the woman who turned things on the brink of collapse into something worth saving. But deep down, I still carried an empty space inside, a quiet absence my family knew nothing about, and maybe they never cared to. When I was 28, Walter suffered a mild stroke. His recovery was slow, and he had to take time off work. Before leaving, he rested his hand on my shoulder and said, "You're ready to lead on your own now. Don't be afraid to grow up, Diana." I watched him walk out of the office, and for the first time, I realized I was no longer the receptionist. I was the one in charge. I didn't have a fancy degree or powerful connections, but I had something stronger, real experience, and a heart that had once been shattered enough to become unbreakable. I began expanding Harborstone's scope. We no longer just advised hotels, we bought small, struggling ones, rebuilt them, rebranded them, and brought them back to life. By the time I turned 30, my company owned or co-owned 12 properties across the South and East Coast of the United States. I rehired former employees who had once been laid off and created a program called Second Start, offering them training in everything from room management to professional hospitality. Some of the very people who used to call me that waitress girl now addressed me as Miss Hart. I didn't hold grudges. I understood that in this world, respect often comes only after you've grown strong enough not to need it. But no matter how far I went, I never forgot where I started. Every morning, I still made my own coffee and wrote work notes by hand, just like back at Silver Pines. I feared that if I got too busy to remember my past, I might lose the reason I began in the first place. And then, fate led me back to a place I thought I'd never return to: the Asheville Country Club. Asheville Country Club was more than a place, it was a symbol. As a child, every time my father drove past its gates, he would say, "That's where people of real class belong." Back then, class meant something unreachable, belonging to a world I could never enter. My family had been members there for over 20 years, hosting Christmas dinners, anniversaries, and even that one humiliating night when I was told to stand outside because my dress was inappropriate. So when I later learned that the club was struggling financially from poor management and debt, I found myself parked at its gate, almost as if guided by something unseen. The old wooden sign read faintly, Est. 1924. I smiled. The place my father once called a paradise for the elite now needed someone to rebuild that paradise. I bought the Asheville Country Club through my company for $16.5 million, a large number, but I knew its potential was worth far more than its crumbling walls. I didn't want to turn it into another symbol of privilege, but into a symbol of transformation. I launched a 14-month restoration project, replacing all the wooden floors, repairing the Olympic pool, renovating the wedding hall, and, most importantly, creating a new community garden where employees and locals could grow vegetables, plant flowers, and host weekend fairs together. I also founded the Walter Brooks Foundation, a vocational scholarship program for women who had lost their jobs or survived abuse, giving them the chance to learn hotel management, housekeeping, or front desk service. Watching those women stand tall again, their eyes filled with a new kind of light, I saw a reflection of my younger self. I never told anyone about it. I didn't post it online or grant interviews. To me, true success isn't about proving you've won, it's about no longer needing to win to feel at peace. Harborstone had become a familiar name in the industry. The press began calling me the silent restorer, the woman who brought broken places back to life, yet rarely appeared in public. I continued to avoid galas and declined invitations from prestigious associations. People couldn't understand why I stayed hidden behind the scenes of the empire I had built, but I knew. There was a wound that had never fully healed, and it carried the name Hart. I didn't want to show my face until I could stand before them without my hands shaking. Then one day, that chance found me on its own. During an internal meeting, my assistant, Jordan, brought in an envelope. "Miss Hart," he said, "Asheville Country Club is preparing for its 100th anniversary. They're inviting all long-time members to attend." I saw my parents' names on the guest list: Robert and Evelyn Hart, founding members. They had no idea that the place they once called the pinnacle of society now belonged to the daughter they had disowned. I held the ivory invitation in my hand, running my fingers over the embossed letters. The Centennial Brunch Celebration. A faint smile crossed my lips. Perhaps the time had come to return, not for revenge, but to witness the moment I had always waited for. A confrontation that required no words. That night, I stood on the balcony of my hotel in Savannah, looking down at the city glittering beneath me. The sounds of life blended together: the wind, the traffic, the faint hum of a world that once left me behind. I took a sip of white wine and wondered. If my father saw me tomorrow, not as the failed artist he once dismissed, but as the owner of the place he worshipped, what would he say? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps, like me, he would remain silent. Because sometimes, silence is the only way to recognize who truly holds the voice. That Sunday morning, Asheville's sky was impossibly clear. Sunlight streamed through rows of maple trees, scattering golden light across my car window. I sat in the back seat and glanced at the clock. 10:27 a.m. The Centennial Brunch celebration began at 10:30 punctual, as every upper-class event always was. Beside me, Jordan reviewed the guest list. "The investors from California have already arrived," he said, glancing at me. "They're seated in the VIP terrace. Would you like me to introduce them to your family?" I smiled. "No need. Today, I'd rather let things happen naturally." Oh, I had chosen a simple outfit: a white blouse with an open collar, cream linen trousers, and low heels. No designer labels, no expensive jewelry. I meant it that way. 10 years ago, I had been asked to leave a dinner table because my outfit was inappropriate. Today, I wanted to see what appropriate really meant in their world. When the car stopped at the gates of Asheville Country Club, my heart beat faster, though my face remained calm. The black iron gates swung open, the words "Founded 1924" arched above an emblem of the class my father once revered like a religion. I used to be the little girl in the back seat, peering through the window, wishing to walk inside without being reminded that I didn't belong. Now, I was the one whose signature appeared on its ownership papers. But that truth, at least for now, remained hidden. Inside the hall, the air was filled with perfume, champagne, and soft laughter, blending into that familiar sound of luxury. I entered with my business partners, two men and a woman from San Francisco, who had just invested $8 million in my new resort project. "So this is the famous Asheville Club?" one of them asked, his tone curious. I smiled and replied, "Famous, yes. But I'm planning to make it meaningful." They laughed, thinking I was joking. We stepped out onto the main terrace, where rows of round tables draped in white linen overlooked the golf course. And there they were. My father, Robert Hart, exactly as I remembered him, navy blazer, red striped tie, gold Rolex gleaming under the sunlight. My mother, Evelyn, sat beside him, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, mimosa in hand. Across from them was my sister, Madeline, dressed in an ivory Dior dress, her hair perfectly pinned up, laughing gracefully with the guests at her table. They sat, as always, at the same table, the Hart table. The staff still called it that, because for 2 decades, no one else had ever been allowed to sit there. I stopped just far enough to watch them. No one recognized me. Maybe it was the backlight of the sun, or maybe, in their minds, the daughter who failed had long ceased to exist. I heard my mother's laughter, then my father's voice. "Madeline, did you hear who just joined the board? The Carsons, they've been our friends for years." Everything felt exactly as I remembered the conversations about status, connections, and that sacred word, class. I walked up the steps, holding a cup of coffee from the serving counter. When my shadow stretched across the brick floor, my mother noticed me first. She frowned, lowering her sunglasses. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice loud enough for 2 nearby tables to hear. "This area is for members, not staff." Heads began to turn. My father turned around, his expression freezing for a moment before tightening into irritation. "Diana? For heaven's sake, what are you doing here, and dressed like that?" I kept my composure and smiled lightly. "Hello, father, mother. I just came to attend the celebration." My mother set her glass down sharply. "Attend the celebration? You think you belong here? This is for people who are appropriate." She left the last word hanging, unwilling to say the truth out loud that she meant people who belong. "I was invited," I said calmly. "By whom?" My father cut in, his tone slicing through the air. "I don't recall inviting you. Who would invite someone like you?" I looked straight into his eyes but said nothing. In that instant, I saw what I had feared all my life, the disdain carefully hidden beneath the mask of civility. He wasn't angry that I was there, he was angry that I dared to appear in a place he considered sacred. Around us, whispers started to spread. A middle-aged woman tilted her head and murmured, "Who is she?" Another replied quietly, "Robert Hart's daughter, I think. The one who dropped out and worked at a cafe." Laughter rippled faintly through the air, sharp and soft at once. I heard every word, but I didn't respond. My silence, once born of fear, had now become my weapon. My father stood up, the sound of his chair scraping against the stone floor cutting sharply through the air. "Get us the owner now," he barked, his voice carrying the same commanding tone he used when running his company. "She doesn't belong here." He pointed directly at me, as if I were an intruder. The entire terrace fell silent. Nearby staff froze in place, exchanging uneasy glances. My mother added coldly, her tone tightening like a whip. "Remove her immediately. I won't have this scene embarrass the club." I still said nothing. One of my investors, Mr. Thomas, turned to me, clearly puzzled. "Is everything all right, Diana?" I gave him a calm smile and said softly, "It will be." At that moment, the club's general manager, Mr. Jenkins, appeared. He had worked there for more than 20 years, a man with silver hair, a measured walk, and eyes that missed nothing. He approached, giving a polite nod to my father. "Is there a problem, Mr. Hart?" My father jerked his chin toward me. "My daughter, or rather, the woman who calls herself my daughter, is disturbing the members. I demand that you bring the owner here immediately." Mr. Jenkins looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. That smile froze the air itself. Adjusting his tie, he turned to my father and said, "Sir, the owner is present." And He paused, speaking slowly, clearly. She's standing right in front of you. The air seemed to thicken instantly. Somewhere, a metal spoon dropped onto a plate with a sharp clang. My father frowned, a disbelieving laugh escaping his lips. What did you just say, Mr. Jenkins maintained his calm smile, then turned toward me with quiet respect. Ma'am, he said gently, would you like to manage your family's membership yourself? The words echoed through the suffocating silence. My mother suddenly rose from her seat, her face strained of color. Madeline's mouth fell open, her lips trembling as if to speak, but no sound came out. And my father, perhaps for the first time in his life, looked utterly undone. He took a step back, his eyes wide, struggling to grasp what he had just heard. What are you saying? I stood still, my hand resting lightly on the coffee cup, the sunlight reflecting off it in soft shades of amber. I didn't need to speak. Everyone was already looking at me not as the disgraced daughter anymore, but as the woman who had just shattered everything they thought they knew. Whispers rippled through the crowd. She's the owner? No way. I heard Hartley Hospitality Group bought this place, but she's a Hart? The murmurs rose and fell like waves against the marble walls. My father, still struggling to regain his composure, jabbed a finger toward Mr. Jenkins, his voice sharp and shaking. This is ridiculous. Bring the real owner here. Now. But Jenkins simply inclined his head slightly and replied, I am speaking to the real owner, Mr. Hart. And I would advise you to be careful with your words when addressing a client, especially when that client happens to be your employer. The entire terrace fell into absolute silence. Every sound, the chatter, the glasses, even the rustling of leaves seemed to vanish. I looked around and saw on my father's face the mix of confusion and humiliation he had once made me feel for years. My mother turned her head away, and Madeline lowered her eyes. I just stood there, calm and steady, realizing that every wound from my past was now being answered not with vengeance, but with silence. In my mind, my own voice echoed, quiet and clear. This is the one moment in my life when I don't need to speak because the truth is speaking for me. As I looked at my parents, frozen in disbelief during that fateful brunch, I understood some wounds don't need revenge. They only need to be exposed to the light. The air on the terrace felt dense, as if the entire world had stopped breathing. I remained where I was, my hand resting on the now cold cup of coffee, sunlight refracting through it like a shard of glass. Every gaze in the room was fixed on me, part curiosity, part fear, and mostly disbelief. My father stood motionless, his face turning pale. My mother held her chin high, but her eyes betrayed her confusion. Madeline stared at me, her lips moving faintly, but no words came out. I slowly set the cup down on the nearest table, adjusted the cuff of my white shirt, and took a single step toward them. If you're looking for the owner, I said, my voice calm and steady. You're looking at her. I'm the one you demanded to see. The words fell into the silence like a stone breaking the surface of still water. My mother let out a nervous laugh, half mockery, half disbelief. Diana, what are you saying? This isn't something to joke about. I met her gaze. Mother, I'm not joking. I'm the new owner of Asheville Country Club, and I don't recall signing any invitation for people who don't respect me. The sentence sliced through the air like a blade. A shocked "oh my God" escaped from a nearby table. Someone dropped a fork, the metallic clang punctuating the stillness that followed. My father's hand trembled, fury and disbelief colliding across his face. That's impossible, he rasped. You're talking nonsense. This is a private club, owned by the board, not. I cut him off, my tone firm but measured. Owned by me. The board only manages operations. Ownership belongs to Harborstone Hospitality Group, and I'm the one who leads it. I saw my father take a small step back, as if he had lost his balance. He turned to my mother, as though waiting for her to deny what he had just heard. But she said nothing, she only looked at me with a stunned, almost frightened expression, like she was staring at a stranger who happened to wear her daughter's face. Jordan, I said quietly. From the table behind me, my assistant stepped forward, holding a brown leather portfolio. He opened it, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and placed them neatly on the table. "Mr. Hart," Jordan began, his tone calm and professional. "According to the official records, Harborstone Hospitality Group acquired full ownership of Asheville Country Club 8 months ago for $16.5 million. Since then, Mrs. Hart has reinvested an additional $7.8 million into renovations, expansions, and operational restructuring. Jordan handed my father the file stamped with the red seal of our legal firm. My father took it, but his hands trembled so much the papers quivered between his fingers. He skimmed through the pages, then froze when his eyes reached the bold print of my name. Diana Hart, Chief Executive Officer, Harborstone Hospitality Group. A low murmur rippled through the terrace. An older man at a nearby table whispered, "She's Robert Hart's daughter?" "I thought they only had one." A woman beside him replied softly, "Maybe this is the one they never talk about." I heard every word. I wasn't angry, just strangely detached. For the first time, I realized I hadn't only been erased by my family, but by society itself. I took another step forward, my voice lowering. "I know that to many of you, I've always been the disgraceful daughter of the Hart family, the one who dropped out, served coffee, worked front desks, lived a life without prestige. But maybe that made everyone forget something simple, that a person's worth isn't measured by where they sit, but by how they rise after being knocked down." No one spoke. I turned to my parents. "Father," I said evenly, "if I had come here today as an ordinary guest, or worse, as one of the staff, would you treat me any differently? Would you look at me as a person? Or would it be the same contempt I've seen all my life?" He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. My mother whispered, her voice trembling, "Diana, what are you doing?" I met her eyes. "Nothing, Mother. I'm just standing still for the first time in my life, exactly where I deserve to be." A few members of the club's management appeared, standing quietly behind Jordan as silent confirmation. Mr. Jenkins, the general manager, nodded toward me. "Mrs. Hart," he said respectfully, "all documents and contracts are valid. You are the legal owner of Asheville Country Club." Then he turned to my father, his voice soft but deliberate. "It's an honor to serve your daughter, Mr. Hart." For the first time, I saw my father no longer as the powerful man I had grown up fearing, but as a small lost figure standing in a world he once ruled. His face flushed red, but his eyes were hollow. "Impossible," he muttered under his breath. This girl. I stepped closer, stopping just an arm's length away. "Yes, this girl," I said quietly. "The same daughter you once said would never make this family proud." A sigh escaped from a nearby table. Someone shook their head. Someone else tapped their friend's arm gently, as if to say, "Don't look." But I didn't look away. My gaze stayed on my parents. "If I weren't the owner of this place today, would you still have asked them to throw me out? If I were just a server clearing tables, would you still give me that same look of disgust you gave me 10 years ago? If I were still poor, still empty-handed, would you even call me family? Or is it only now that I'm successful that you remember you had 2 daughters?" I didn't raise my voice. My tone was calm, steady like a verdict delivered by time itself. The question wasn't just for them. It was for everyone in that room, for all the people who had ever believed that wealth and status defined a person's worth. My mother's hand trembled as she clutched her napkin. "Diana, you're making everyone uncomfortable." I smiled faintly. "No, Mother, I'm just making them see the truth." I turned to Jordan. "Thank you. Could you show them the investment report?" Jordan nodded and opened a presentation on his tablet, projecting it onto the club's small display screen. The figures appeared in bold, glowing lines. Revenue up 142%, membership up 36%, and the new community garden earning widespread praise in the media. Every number bore my name. My father stared at the screen, his expression shifting from disbelief to shock. You did all of this?" he whispered. I nodded. By myself, father. Without family favors, without help, without using the Hart name for privilege. I walked alone, fell alone, and stood up on my own. I turned to face the entire room. I have only one question, I said, my voice carrying just enough to reach every corner. If I weren't the owner here today, would any of you still treat me like a human being or just like something beneath your feet? No one answered. A few lowered their heads. A few avoided my eyes, and a few nodded slightly, as if recognizing something they too had done to someone else. I took a deep breath, feeling as though I had just placed a final period at the end of an old chapter in my life. My father remained frozen, my mother turned away, and Madeline gripped her purse tightly, tears glimmering in her eyes. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just lightness. After years of being told I wasn't enough, I no longer needed their validation. I had proven myself in the only language they understood, not through words, but through an undeniable truth. And as Jordan gathered the documents, I spoke softly, just loud enough for all three of them to hear. Silence, the thing that once made me the smallest person in this family, is now what makes me the strongest one in this room. The air grew so heavy that even the faint clink of silverware on porcelain could be heard. My father still stood there, his face flushed crimson, his eyes burning with fury. My mother stepped back half a pace, and Madeline looked around desperately, searching for someone to intervene, but no one dared. I looked at them, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the mirror image of my childhood, the roles reversed. I had been the one humiliated in front of a crowd while they stood by, indifferent. The difference was that today, I didn't need anyone to defend me, and I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. I turned to Mr. Jenkins, the club's longtime manager, my tone calm. Mr. Jenkins, could you please bring me the Asheville Country Club operational charter? He nodded quickly and walked toward the front desk, where copies were kept for reference. A few minutes later, he returned with a thick, navy leather-bound book sealed with the golden emblem of the Board of Governors. I flipped through a few pages until I found what I needed. Article 9, Member Conduct and Disciplinary Action. I read aloud, slowly and clearly, so that everyone in the room could hear. Any behavior that insults, humiliates, or undermines the dignity of staff members, fellow members, or the owner shall be considered conduct unbecoming and may result in suspension of membership for up to 90 days. When I lifted my head, I met my parents' eyes directly. How ironic, I said evenly, that the very man who once lectured me about protecting the family's reputation is now the one disgracing it in public. My father's jaw tightened. What are you planning to do? He demanded. I answered, my voice steady, almost cold. What any responsible owner would do: enforce the rules. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. She's not joking, someone whispered. Oh God, this is going to be all over the news. Hart suspending her own family, no one will believe it. But I didn't care. I turned to Jordan, who stood beside me like a pillar of calm strength. Mr. Jordan, I said, record this in writing. The memberships of Mr. Robert Hart, Mrs. Evelyn Hart, and Mrs. Madeline Grant are hereby suspended for 90 days under the Conduct Unbecoming Clause, pending board review. Jordan nodded and began typing on his tablet. The soft tapping of the keys echoed through the silence, steady, deliberate, more powerful than any shouting could ever be. My mother's eyes widened in disbelief. Diana, have you lost your mind? What are you doing to your own family? I looked at her, my expression no longer angry, just tired. No, Mother. I'm doing what you and Father never did for me, setting a boundary. My father slammed his palm against the table, his voice erupting like thunder. I am a founding member. No one has the right to do this to me. I tilted my head slightly and replied, calm and sharp as glass. No one is too high to relearn respect, Father. The higher your title, the greater your responsibility to honor it. This club was built on principles, not privilege. My father opened his mouth to argue, but the words caught in his throat. I saw his hand tremble, not from anger, but from the shock of being placed, for the first time in his life, in a position where he had to listen instead of speak. My mother glanced around the room, trying to smile, her lips trembling with a fragile awkwardness. Please, everyone, don't misunderstand, this is surely some kind of joke. But no one laughed. The silence in that room was so thick you could hear the breath of every person in it. Madeline was the only one who spoke, her voice unsteady. You don't have to do this, Diana. After all, there's still— I turned to her with a thin, almost weightless smile. Still what? The people who protected you for years while treating me like a burden? The ones who banned me from home because I was an embarrassment? Or the ones who just ordered staff to remove me from the place I own? She fell silent. I lifted my chin and looked around the room. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm simply preserving what this place was founded on, a space built on respect. My tone softened. No one is banned forever. 90 days is enough time to reflect on what respect truly means. After that, they can reapply for membership if they've learned. The room grew eerily still. My father remained standing, his fists clenched, but his voice was gone. Mr. Jenkins stepped forward and bowed slightly. Mrs. Hart, will proceed with the formal administrative process immediately. I nodded. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Please ensure everything is done properly with no special treatment. 2 security officers, ironically, the same ones my father had ordered to remove her immediately, now stepped forward at Mr. Jenkins's signal. They weren't rough, they simply moved with quiet professionalism, keeping a polite distance as one of them said, "Sir, ma'am, please step outside, this is a temporary procedure." No. The scene unfolded slowly, as if time itself wanted to etch every detail into memory. My father straightened his back as he walked, his hand clenched so tightly the veins stood out beneath his skin. My mother looked back once, her eyes filled with a humiliation I had never seen before. Madeline followed behind, silent, her head lowered, tears sliding down her cheeks. When the great wooden doors closed behind them, the sound echoed through the marble hall, sharp, final, reverberating against the stone walls until it faded into quiet. No one in the room spoke. A few people bowed their heads slightly in acknowledgement, others avoided my gaze. I didn't speak either, I just took a deep breath. For the first time in my life, the room that had once made me tremble now felt smaller, just big enough to fit my calm. Jordan stepped closer and whispered, "Are you all right?" I nodded, a faint smile crossing my lips. I am. They needed this lesson not because I was angry, but because if they never learn respect, they'll keep hurting others. I glanced around the room. The midday sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, glinting off the table where my father had sat, now empty except for a half-spilled glass of red wine. I walked over and placed my hand gently on the edge of that table, as if closing a chapter. When they walked out, I said quietly to Jordan, it wasn't just their membership that was suspended, it was their old sense of power. And maybe that's the real justice. The brunch slowly resumed. The jazz music returned, the guests began to eat again, but something in the air had shifted. I sat at a nearby table with my investors and poured a bit of champagne. Mr. Thomas raised his glass, his expression a mix of awe and respect. That was impressive, he said. I smiled. No, that was necessary. I raised my glass and felt the soft fizz of champagne spread across my tongue. Outside the window, in the distance, the figures of my parents grew smaller as they walked down the white stone path. I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was something quieter, peace. As if, finally, the silent circle of my life had closed on its own terms, within the same order they once used to suffocate me. A thought echoed inside me, something my father would probably never understand. Real power isn't about who sits higher. It's about who keeps their dignity while standing alone. The news spread faster than I imagined. Just a day after that fateful brunch, the Asheville Country Club, once known for its quiet golf matches and polite afternoon teas, became the eye of a social media storm. It started with a post from a young member who had been sitting nearby. A short, 30-second video showed me suspending my own family's membership. The caption, written in sensational headlines, read, New owner of Asheville Club suspends her own family in front of crowd, and the reason has everyone stunned. Within 4 hours, it had over 1 million views and was being shared across every platform. The comments poured in. She's a legend. Finally, someone stood up to a toxic family. Not sure whether to call her brave or cold. Who is this woman? I need to learn emotional control like that. Then came the criticism. Shameful, no matter what they did, you never humiliate your parents. A decent daughter wouldn't do that. Money made her forget her roots. I read every line. It felt strange, like watching myself in a mirror reflected through thousands of unfamiliar eyes. The next morning, the Asheville Gazette ran a headline in bold letters across the front page. Family feud at Asheville Country Club, heiress or avenger. Beneath it was a photo of me walking out of the club's front hall, head high, my face cut in half by the midday sun, one side in light, the other in shadow. The article retold the entire scene, quoting anonymous sources and the viral video. One paragraph read, Diana Hart, the long-forgotten heir of the prominent Hart real estate family, is revealed to be the secret owner of Asheville Country Club. During Sunday's brunch, she stunned everyone by suspending the memberships of her parents and sister, the same family who once treated her as a stain on their legacy. I stared at the paper on the breakfast table, the cup of coffee still warm in my hand, and felt a chill run down my spine. In just 24 hours, the private story I had guarded for years had become a piece of high society drama for strangers to discuss over their morning coffee. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages, emails, calls piling in like a storm. Some came from strangers. Thank you, Diana. Your story gave me the courage to leave my toxic parents. Another wrote, you're cruel. Even if they were wrong, they still gave you life. My company inbox flooded with interview requests, speaking invitations on women in leadership, and even a publisher reaching out to offer a book deal, sign a memoir while the story is hot. I sat in my office staring at the screen, seeing my name everywhere. Diana Hart, once dismissed by my family, had suddenly become a two-sided symbol, feminist and rebel. Strangely, both labels left me feeling empty. The phone rang again. The caller ID read, Dad. I hesitated for a few seconds, then answered. His voice came through hoarse with anger. Do you think you can defame us like this without consequences? I've already contacted our lawyers. You abused your ownership to humiliate people, even your own parents. I'll sue. I'll have the board remove you from management. I said nothing. His voice sounded like an old recorded command, cold and hollow. Finally I replied, I didn't humiliate anyone. I simply stopped being humiliated. Then I hung up. A few minutes later, an email from Mom appeared. Diana, I beg you. End this before the press destroys our family's reputation. Although your father is impulsive, he is suffering. You don't understand, people are talking everywhere. We just need a public apology and this will pass. I read the email, then closed it without replying. Because I knew what my mother meant by everything will pass. In her world, that phrase always meant the same thing, that they would once again bury someone else's pain to protect their own image. That afternoon, Madeline called. I almost ignored it, but something in me still pressed accept. Her voice trembled. You've destroyed our family's reputation. Charities are pulling their sponsorships, the press is digging into our past. I can't even show my face at events anymore. Do you realize what you've done? I let out a quiet laugh. I only reflected what they once did to me, Maddie. The difference is, this time, the world saw it happen. You've made yourself look cruel, Diana, she said, her voice breaking. Mom and Dad were wrong, but they're still our family. Family? I asked, my tone lowering. You mean the people who told me not to appear in the family Christmas photo because I threw off the balance? Or the ones who banned me from coming home because they didn't want the neighbors to know I worked as a receptionist? There was a long silence. Then Madeline whispered, small and shaky. You don't understand. We were raised to always protect appearances, and you chose to destroy that. No, Maddie. I said softly. I chose to live honestly. Oh. When the call ended, I sat watching the sunset fall over the mountains, the small city below beginning to glow with evening lights. Inside me was a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. Maybe because, deep down, I was still that child who once longed to hear her parents say, "We're proud of you." But now, all I heard were threats, shame, and the echo of humiliation turned inside out. That evening, Mr. Jenkins called. His calm voice carried a trace of worry. "Mrs. Hart, I think we need to consider the public reaction. You were entirely correct by the rules, but the media narrative is moving fast. If this turns into a daughter taking revenge on her parents, the club's brand could take serious damage." "I understand," I said quietly, my voice rough from exhaustion. "What do you suggest?" "I advise letting your legal and communications teams handle it," he said. "Issue a formal statement measured, factual, not defensive. Maintain your position as a professional leader, not an angry daughter." I nodded, as if he could see me. "Thank you, Jenkins, you always see farther than most." He gave a small chuckle. "Not really, ma'am. I've just seen too many people lose everything because they needed to prove they were right." After the call, I stayed in my office. Most of the lights were off, leaving only the glow of my laptop reflecting across my face. I opened the video, the same 30-second clip spreading like wildfire. I watched myself, standing tall, composed, no shouting, no rage, just truth. But when the clip ended, I realized what haunted me wasn't the action itself. It was my father's eyes in that final moment, the look of a man who had built his life on control and pride, finally realizing his daughter had grown beyond both. I let out a quiet sigh. Maybe Jenkins was right. Real power isn't about proving who's wrong, it's about knowing when to stop. But stopping had never been easy for me. Every time I tried, memories of humiliation resurfaced, the nights I was told to leave the dinner table, the moments I was made invisible. I opened my email and typed a short line to my attorney. "We need to discuss a communication strategy. I don't want to win by breaking others, but I won't bow either." I hit send, then leaned back in my chair. Outside, the rain had started to fall, soft, rhythmic, steady as a heartbeat. Inside, I was still learning how to balance two worlds, the woman running an empire, and the daughter who once only wanted to be loved. 3 days later, I sat in the small conference room of Harborstone Hospitality Group on the 14th floor, staring out the glass wall toward the misty green hills of Asheville. The morning was damp and hesitant, as if the sky itself couldn't decide between rain and sun, just like me, caught somewhere between justice and compassion. On the table, my laptop was still open to a headline. "Asheville Club owner faces potential lawsuit from her own family." Beneath it were hundreds of divided comments, some defending me, others condemning me. I closed the laptop, took a deep breath, and reminded myself. Now, I had to think like an executive, not a daughter. Across the table sat Sarah Chin, my lead attorney, her hair pulled neatly back, her tone calm and measured as always. "Diana, we need to discuss our next steps," she said, sliding a thick folder toward me. "Mr. Roberts' lawyers have officially filed notice. They're invoking the clause on conflict of interest between the owner and founding members, claiming you abused authority." I flipped through the papers. They cited every regulation, every technicality, every loophole they could find. It was classic my father. When he lost control, he turned to law. I looked up. "And their chances?" Sarah gave a slight shrug. "Low. You acted within your legal rights. But the issue isn't about winning, it's about optics. A public family lawsuit makes you look vindictive." Marcus, my financial advisor and Sarah's longtime friend, leaned forward. "I see 3 options," he said. 1. Stay firm. We file a countersuit, prove they violated club conduct policies. You'll win, but it'll drag on for months, maybe years, and the media will feed on it. 2. Conditional reduction, require a public apology and a mediated reconciliation. Keeps your boundary, but softens your image. 3. He paused, meeting my eyes. Sell the club, cut it all off. Step out of their orbit, out of the money, the power, the legacy. You could reinvest anywhere else. At its current valuation, you'd double your profit. The room was silent. I rested my elbows on the table, staring down at my hands, the same hands that once scrubbed hotel floors and worked espresso machines, now steering a network of assets worth tens of millions. I had come so far, and yet, at the mere mention of my parents, something inside me still stirred. Sarah tilted her head. I know you don't want to sell, but keeping the suspension means open war. The press will turn it into a morality play, filial duty versus rebellion. I gave a faint smile. I don't want a war. But I'm not running either. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the lavender rose in the community garden I built for women rebuilding their lives were in full bloom. I remembered that afternoon teaching them how to write a resume, the light in their eyes when someone finally called them by name. I hadn't bought the club to strike back at the past, I bought it to transform a place that once excluded me into one where anyone could belong. Turning back, I spoke slowly. We'll go with the second option. No revenge. No humiliation, but clear boundaries. I want them to understand this isn't about money, it's about respect. Sarah nodded, relief softening her face. Good. We'll draft the reconciliation terms. But Diana, be ready. They might refuse. I know, I said. But if they do, at least this time their daughter will be the one setting the conditions, not the one begging for them. That afternoon, I sat alone in my office as the sunlight faded across the wall. I opened my laptop and began typing a letter to my father. Each word, each period, came with a pause. I didn't want it to sound like an ultimatum, but I couldn't let him mistake firmness for weakness. Dad, I don't need an apology about money, nor do I want you to make things normal again. Because normal, to you, means I bow my head. I won't do that anymore. I only need one thing, that you acknowledge I deserve respect not because I own the club, but because I am a person. If you truly wish to restore your membership, send an apology in writing not for me, but for yourself. Diana. I read it over several times. There was no anger in it, only conviction. Then I hit send. When the message disappeared from the screen, I felt lighter but also strangely hollow. I knew there wouldn't be a reply. Maybe there never would be. But at least, after 10 years, I had finally written what I'd needed to say. 3 days passed with no word. I buried myself in meetings with the design team for our new hotel project, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Charlotte, to that big white fenced house with the stone walkway I used to shovel as a child. I wondered what my parents were telling the neighbors. Were they saying that their artist daughter had turned into a cold-hearted businesswoman, or were they pretending I still didn't exist? On the 4th day, as I was leaving the office, Jordan approached me with a cream-colored envelope in his hand. Delivered from Charlotte, he said, his expression calm but his eyes uneasy. I took it, feeling a tightness in my chest. The handwriting on the front slanted, bold, unmistakably familiar, Robert A. Hart. Inside was a single sheet of paper, plain and deliberate, the handwriting firm and unembellished. No excuses, no justification, just 4 words. We were wrong, Diana. Completely. 4 words that ended 10 heavy years. I read them over and over until I knew them by heart. For the first time, he didn't say I, he said we. A quiet acknowledgement that the fault had never been mine alone. I sat down, still holding the letter, and felt something strange. I didn't cry. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, just stillness, light as a long exhale. I called Sarah. Cancel the litigation, I said, and prepare to reinstate their membership. But this time, they'll have to sign the new conduct code, the same rules that apply to everyone else, no exceptions. Her voice softened, a smile beneath the words. I understand. It's not about winning anymore, is it? No, I said, gazing out the window as the evening light spilled gold across the empty golf course. It's about learning to redefine power. Because for me, power was no longer about making others fear me, it was knowing when to stop and still being able to stand tall while forgiving. A month later, Asheville had slipped gently into early autumn. The leaves were turning pale gold, brushed with hints of red like watered-down wine. The air carried a faint scent of wood and lavender, the same scent that always took me back to those mornings I used to brew coffee in a tiny apartment years ago. Today, I returned to the golf course not for a meeting or a gala, but for something far more personal. The first community lunch I had initiated. It was an idea I had dreamed of for a long time, a shared meal for all staff and their families, where everyone sat at the same table. No ranks, no uniforms, no owners or servers. Once a month, the club would close its doors to members for a few hours and open them to the people who truly built its value. I wanted to erase the line between those who are served and those who serve, a line that had been used to measure my worth for half my life. As I stepped into the main hall, the warm aroma of food filled the air: roast meat, fresh garden salad, apple pie. The staff, usually dressed in uniform, now wore their own clothes, shirts, floral dresses, jeans, and every face was lit with an easy, genuine smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Hart," a chef called out from the kitchen. I smiled back. "Afternoon, Marcus. What's on the menu today?" "Apple pie, my wife's recipe. You'll love it." Laughter rippled through the room, light, natural, nothing like the tense silence of a month ago. Jordan approached, holding a clipboard. "Everything's ready," he said. "Mr. and Mrs. Hart have arrived too. They're seated in the back row." I nodded quietly, saying nothing. Even after reading their short letter of apology, I wasn't sure I was ready to face them. A part of me still needed the distance, not out of anger, but out of fear that old emotions might come rushing back like a wave I wasn't prepared to meet. I walked out to the terrace, where rows of wooden tables had been arranged neatly. In the center stood a long table for the short ceremony we'd planned, a presentation of the new internal scholarship fund I'd created for employees' children with outstanding grades. I saw familiar faces: the kitchen crew, the managers, the cleaning staff, the security guards. They sat together, eating, talking, the sound of children laughing echoing between the tables. When the lunch began, I stood up and took the microphone. "A month ago," I began, "this place was the center of controversy. But today, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the people who truly bring this place to life." I paused, scanning the room. We all know a place isn't defined by its furniture or the wine it serves, but by how people treat one another. And today, I want us to begin again, not just as a club, but as a community where everyone belongs. Applause broke out, soft at first, then growing warmer. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother in the back row wearing a beige knit cardigan, no makeup, no familiar Prada bag. Her face looked tired but peaceful. Beside her sat my father, in a gray shirt, no tie, holding a glass of water. Both of them sat quietly, listening. After I finished my speech, I stepped down and blended into the crowd. Many of the staff shook my hand, some hugged me, thanking me with eyes that glowed with sincerity. A little girl ran up and handed me a tiny paper flower, whispering, "My mom works in the laundry room. Thank you for the scholarship." I knelt down to take it, smiling more naturally than I had in years. And just then, I noticed my mother standing nearby, watching the scene with an expression I had never seen before, like she was witnessing something she had never truly understood her whole life. As everyone began to eat, I heard slow footsteps approaching behind me. My father's voice came, low and rough. "You did something I never could." I turned around. He stood tall, hands in his pockets, but his eyes no longer held the fire of a man desperate to win. They held the quiet acceptance of someone learning how to lose with grace. All my life, I only knew how to build things: houses, companies, clubs, but I never knew how to build trust. He paused, glancing around at the staff chatting and laughing together. "You figured it out." I gave a small nod, my smile faint but steady. "I just learned that power doesn't come from a name or a fortune, it comes from how you treat people." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "I used to think respect was something people owed me. Now I realize it's something you have to give first." His gaze shifted toward my mother, sitting a few tables away, awkwardly but earnestly chatting with a few employees. She wasn't used to sitting as an equal among them, but at least she was trying. When her eyes met mine, she smiled a small, trembling smile, but real. We sat together near the end of the meal. My mother told the story of the first dinner she ever cooked for my father, grilled salmon that burned, and how he laughed about it all night. Madeline didn't come, but she sent a letter saying she needed more time to understand. I didn't blame her. Maybe each of us needed our own distance to loosen the masks our family had made us wear for so long. After lunch, I walked out to the golf course, where the afternoon sun stretched soft and even across the grass. From afar came the hum of laughter and conversation, a gentle kind of music. My father walked beside me in silence for a while, then said quietly, "You know, the first time I came here, I thought power meant having people bow when you entered a room. But today, I see it's when you walk in. And everyone looks up not out of fear, but out of respect." I turned to him, the sunlight glinting off the silver strands in his hair. "Dad," I said softly, "maybe this is the first time we're really talking, not arguing." He smiled faintly. "Maybe so. And maybe it's the first time I've seen you not trying to be seen because you already know who you are." I looked at him, then, out across the club, the place that had once stood as a symbol of exclusion, now a space of connection. It wasn't perfect. The distance between us still lingered, the wounds hadn't fully healed. But in the warm light of dusk, among the clinking of cutlery and the sound of children's laughter, I felt something I'd been searching for my entire life. They were finally listening. Night had fully fallen by the time everyone left. The air over the golf course was unnervingly still, only the whisper of wind through the trees and the soft chirping of crickets by the lake. I sat alone on a wooden bench near the tee box, a glass of white wine in hand, reflecting the faint glow of distant lights. The grass beneath my feet was damp from the light afternoon rain, stretching out in a smooth, dark green carpet. The quiet was so deep I could hear my own breathing. I swirled the wine slowly, watching the reflections tremble on the surface, and then I laughed. Not the proud laugh of someone who had won, but the quiet laugh of someone who had finally endured enough to realize there was nothing left to prove. In that moment, an image of my father flashed in my mind, the flushed face, the furious eyes from that day in the hall when he shouted, "Get us the owner now." Now, thinking of it, I felt no bitterness. Only a strange, distant amusement. He did get the owner after all, just not the one he expected. I took a small sip. The wine was crisp and cool, sliding slowly across my tongue. I used to hate drinking alone. It made me feel hollow, like there was no one left who wanted to share this world with me. But tonight, the solitude wasn't lonely. It felt peaceful, weightless. I no longer needed anyone else to validate my worth. The phone buzzed softly in my hand. An unknown number. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. A young woman's voice came through, clear, confident. "Hello, Mrs. Hart. This is Allison from Verve magazine. We're working on a feature called Women in Power, about women who are redefining what strength means in today's world. We'd love to interview you." I smiled, leaning back, eyes lifting to the sky. The stars were sparse, but bright. "Thank you, Allison," I said slowly. "But I don't think I'm the right fit for that feature." There was a pause on the other end, then she said, surprised, "But Mrs. Hart, people see you as a symbol, a woman who stood up to an entire system, even her own family." I shook my head slightly, my voice calm and measured. "I'm not interested in talking about power. I want to talk about freedom, freedom from other people's expectations. Power is what people use to control. Freedom is what lets us truly live." The line went silent for a while before the young woman finally replied, "I understand. But if you ever change your mind, Verve will always be honored to have you." I smiled faintly. "Thank you. Maybe one day." I hung up and set the phone down beside my glass. The breeze drifted through, carrying the scent of fresh grass and the cool edge of night air. I looked out toward the lake where the lights shimmered on the water and thought back over the entire journey, from the girl who was scolded by her father for wearing a dress that wasn't elegant enough, to the woman who was once thrown out of a dining room, and finally to the one who now owned the very place that once rejected her. It all felt like a long dream, not just about success, but about awakening. I used to believe happiness meant being recognized, making others respect me. But now I understood happiness is simply being yourself without the fear of being rejected. In the distance, the lights in the main building went out one by one. I knew my parents had left earlier, but before they did, my father had placed a small envelope on my desk. Inside was a photo from my high school graduation. In it, I stood between them, smiling shyly. Behind us, the sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow across the sky. On the back of the photo, in his firm handwriting, he had written just 3 words. "We're learning." I traced the words with my fingertip. Maybe this was his way of apologizing again, not with explanations, but with acknowledgement. And maybe that was all I had ever needed. I stood up, picked up my car keys, and began walking. The grass was slightly damp beneath my shoes, mud splashed faintly against my heels, but I didn't mind. The Asheville night was quiet. When I opened my car door, the wind slipped through my hair, lifting a few loose strands off my shoulder. In the side mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself, not the daughter trying to please everyone, but a woman who was ordinary, strong, and free. I started the engine and drove away from the golf course. The car rolled slowly along the winding hill road, flanked by open fields of green. My headlights swept across the path, illuminating patches of lavender swaying gently in the wind. Far above, the stars shone brighter now, scattered across the sky like 1,000 reminders that life is long, and everything can begin again. A faint sound of piano drifted through the air, perhaps from the banquet hall where someone lingered behind. I switched on the small cabin light. Its warm glow fell softly on the photo resting on the passenger seat. The face in the picture, young, fragile, but certain, made me smile. I thought of what my father once said, reputation is what keeps you standing. And then of what life had taught me instead. Reputation may keep you standing, but only peace will keep you moving forward. A voice formed quietly in my mind, steady and slow, a farewell to the girl I used to be, the one who kept chasing approval where it never existed. My family once taught me that value lies in reputation. But life taught me that true worth lies in peace. And today, for the first time, I feel free. The car turned the final corner. The hill opened before me, bathed in silver moonlight. I rolled the window down, letting the autumn wind rush through my hair, carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers. Inside me, there was no anger, no resentment, only stillness, deep and real. And in that quiet night, I knew my journey wasn't ending here, it was only just beginning.